Welcome back to Neuro-Conversant Leadership, where we talk about effective communication in a neurodiverse world. I'm Jeremy Doran. I work with scientists, doctors, and engineers, and I help them make the transition into becoming great leaders. Today, we're going to talk about DEI. Whether you love the concept or you hate the concept, either way, you're going to like this episode, so listen up. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, it's all the rage these days. And I mean that in two ways. It's something HR people throughout the world are pushing for. You see it as a buzzword, and it's in mission statements, it's in annual reports, it's all over the place. But it's also the source of a lot of rage. You see a lot of people pushing back against it who think it's unfair, and they think that DEI itself is actually racist and unfair. One reason for this controversy, it seems to me, is that there are actually two different issues being talked about, and people are not careful enough to separate the two. Some people, when they're talking about it, are really just discussing whether or not discrimination should exist and if everyone should be given a fair chance and a fair opportunity. Some people are talking about whether there should be laws around that and enforce it, and if so, what they should be. And those are two very different topics. And I've seen firsthand, and I've experienced firsthand, that when people are having a conversation about two different topics without realizing it, things rarely go well. In fact, just about never. So I'm going to studiously avoid talking about whether or not there should be any rules, laws, or codes around it. Instead, I'm going to talk about why companies and leaders within companies should embrace diversity, regardless of what the laws or the rules say. There's a very famous study by Credit Suisse, and they looked at 2,400 publicly traded companies from the years 2005 to 2011. They compared companies who had at least one woman on the board of directors to companies that didn't have any. There were three noticeable differences when you looked at those two companies. Companies that had at least one woman on the board had a return on equity, or ROE, that was 26% higher. The return on equity was 16% compared to 12%. Net income growth was 14% compared to 10%, a 40% difference in net income growth. And the debt to equity ratio, basically measuring how highly leveraged a company is, was 4% lower in companies that had a woman on the board of directors. Now, that's not a huge amount, but if you were listening, this study took place over 2008, and you may remember there's a great big crash. And during that time, companies who had at least one woman on the board were much, much faster in reducing their amount of leverage, which made them much more financially stable. So this study shows that diversity, at least in this case of having a woman on the board of directors, far outperformed their peers. And they talked about 7 different reasons, but when I look at them, it really boils down to 2 options. Either having a woman on the board gave a better mix of leadership skills. So statistically, women are better at defining responsibilities well. They are also more likely to enact a mentorship or coaching program, and they tend to be more risk averse and they push for lower debt levels. That's one option. The other option is that there's actually no direct correlation. Instead, these companies were successful. They were already open-minded and they were willing to have women on their board. And having women on the board per se did not make the companies perform better. But what it did was it doubled the size of their talent pool. And by doubling the size of your talent pool, you are going to have much more effective people and you're going to have better results. So if you're the CEO or a business owner or a team leader, do you really care which one it is, what the reason is? Personally, I believe it's both. I think that the diversity in points of view and the skill set, as well as having a larger talent pool to draw from, are both very significant. But if you believe it's one or you believe it's the other, the answer is still that being willing to hire and promote people regardless of their gender leads to greater productivity and greater profits. And who doesn't want that? Now, this study only had one group of people who's been historically discriminated against, which is women. But I use it because it's a very large study, it's well known, and I feel that it's pretty fairly representative of the power of diversity in general in both hiring and promotion practices. So even if you don't believe there's a direct causation between diversity and productivity, just the increase in size of talent pool alone, it's difficult to argue against. Now, that's at companies in general, at the higher level. What about within the team level? They found that diversity helps in problem solving and in generating new and innovative products. And one reason, a big reason, is that diverse groups tend to challenge each other more. They have different points of view, so there's no groupthink, or there's a lot less of it. And when each idea gets challenged and people don't just automatically go along, it causes people to do more research. Two people disagree, so they all do research. And when they're doing research, two things happen. All of a sudden, they're now looking at facts and not assumptions. And they're finding out new data that none of them had thought of before. And so more innovative ideas come from that research. The third thing is that because it's more fact-based, fewer mistakes are made. Because everything gets challenged and researched, if there was just a mistake that everyone believed, it's more likely to be found out because of the research that you're doing. So let's think of a common workplace example of where diverse points of view is incredibly helpful. When you're developing a new product, if you only had one group involved, it's not going to go well. If you're developing a new product and it's only the engineers, then you're going to get something that is designed very well. It's going to be awesome. If you only have the salespeople involved, you're going to have something that looks exactly like what the client wants at the price that they want. If only manufacturing is involved, then it's going to be a product that's very easy to manufacture. And if it's only service, you're going to have something that's very serviceable, easily repaired. In each of those cases, you're not going to have a successful product. If it's something that the clients want at the price they want, you might be losing money every time. If it's only the best product design, clients might not want that, and it might be too expensive. So when you have a new product being developed, you normally have a product manager who is taking points of view from all of the different groups. And when you synthesize all those different points of view, that's how you can come up with the best solution. So that's a common workplace example of where different points of view makes for the best solution. But further studies have shown that the more complex an individual problem is, the less effective having that traditional definition of diversity actually is. So Allison Reynolds and David Lewis in March of 2017 wrote a paper, and it was about their experiences in running strategic exercise with groups focused on new, uncertain, and complex problems which were time sensitive, so they're under the gun. So they'd done over 100 of these projects over the course of 12 years. And one thing they measured was the diversity of the groups in terms of age, gender, and ethnicity. Now, when they went back and looked at all the data, they knew what they were going to find. They were going to find that the more diverse the group, the better the results. The problem is that they actually found no correlation between the diversity and effectiveness when diversity was defined by age, gender, and ethnicity. They were stumped. They did not know how this could possibly be because everything had always told them diversity helps. So they started to wonder if maybe there was a different type of diversity that they weren't seeing. So what they did was they used something called the AEM cube. It was developed by Peter Robertson. He was a psychiatrist and business consultant. And it measures the difference in the way people approach change. So two different things that they really focused on were knowledge processing. And that was really focused on whether or not people use and rely on existing knowledge Or do they prefer to do research and generate new knowledge when they're facing a situation they've never seen before? And the second one is perspective. Do people prefer to deploy their own ideas and their own fairly narrow expertise, or do they prefer to organize and integrate the ideas and the expertise of others? And the results, when they used that as a measure of diversity, were very clear. Teams with higher cognitive diversity came up with better solutions in shorter time periods. Teams with lower cognitive diversity either came up with less effective solutions, or they weren't even able to come up with solutions at all within the time frame. Now, for me, all of this makes sense, but even that is still only a part of it. So the AEM cube is just one assessment, and they're using 2 dimensions from that. If you look at the Myers-Briggs, there are 4 different dimensions, and the LMI Achiever, which I like to use, has 10 dimensions. So if an increase in just 2 dimensions of cognitive diversity from the AEM had this big an impact, can you imagine what full, real neurodiversity within a team can do? The problem is that neurodiversity is tough to see. Unlike age, gender, and ethnicity, you can't just look at someone and be able to tell. And it's not even easy to define. There are some definitions. They talk about being on the autism spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, and a few other things that have names. But really, for my mind, neurodiversity is anyone who thinks differently than the norm. And sometimes it's really just people who think differently than you. Somehow, within the workplace, it seems to be one of the few things that it is still okay to discriminate against people about. I do networking, and when someone asks me what I do, once in a while, I will jokingly say, I teach engineers how to talk to humans. Every time I've ever told that story, people laugh. They absolutely understand what I'm talking about, and then they tell me a story. My favorite story, horrifying but fun, is that it was a marketing person, and every once in a while within their team, somebody had to go and talk to the engineers to get an answer, and they would actually draw straws. They would draw straws because they did not want to go and talk to that engineer. That's discrimination. Now, engineers are typically not neurotypical. They're often divergent, not always, but often. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to discriminate against them. And conversely, sometimes it's not about someone who is neurodivergent. It's just about someone who's different than you. Now, if you flip it, a group of engineers, if they were trying to solve a problem, how open do you think they would be to a marketing person being added to the group to help solve that problem? Even though studies show, ones we've talked about here and countless others, that diversity within a group really helps to come up with the best solution. So they should embrace that person who thinks so differently. So when you're thinking about diversity and inclusion, don't limit it. Don't limit it to gender, race, color, orientation. Seek out people who think differently than you, whether they're truly neurodivergent or they're just neuro different than you are. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And whether you feel good or bad about the whole DEI movement, I hope this helps you embrace diversity in general. Have a great week. Thank you so much for listening to Neuroconversant Leadership. If you found this beneficial, can you do me one small favor? It'll be quick, I promise. Can you go and give this podcast a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen before doing anything else? Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then I need you to keep driving. And then when you're done and parked, then go ahead and give me a review. Hopefully 5 stars, but whatever you are comfortable honestly giving. Thank you and have a great day.